Hey everyone, this is Heidi from the blog Hands Occupied with another knitting tutorial for you today. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the different ways to add a lifeline to your work, which makes tearing out and counting a breeze. So in knitting, it's useful to use something called a lifeline from time to time. What you can see in my swatch here, this red piece of yarn is a lifeline I have inserted. Lifelines are a way for you to mark securely how far you've knit in your knitting, but be able to, because of the lifeline, quickly rip back your knitting if you've made a mistake. Lifelines are great for fixing mistakes, and they're also great for keeping track of rows if you're doing something like, let's say, a sweater that uses a ton of stockinette stitch. Lifelines are a good way also to keep track of your row count when there's just miles and miles of stockinette that can be hard to keep track of when it's all the same. So let's show you how to insert a lifeline. There's a couple different ways to insert lifelines that I like to use. The easiest way is to have some scrap yarn. I'm going to demonstrate with this yellow yarn, and use a tapestry needle, also known as a yarn needle. It's just a needle that has usually a little bit blunter of a tip. It's not a knitting needle, it's a sewing needle. It's got that blunter tip, and it usually has an eye that's big enough for your yarn to easily go through. If you don't own one of these as a knitter or crocheter, this is probably something you'll want to invest in. They're usually a couple bucks at the craft store. At any rate, I have this scrap yarn from another project. It's best if your lifelines are done in a contrasting color from the body color of your knitting project, so you can easily locate it at a glance. So to insert a lifeline, the easiest possible way is to simply sew your lifeline through every loop in your row parallel with your knitting needle. So you just do this all the way across your row, like so, and you can even pull your lifeline up partway through to give yourself a little more slack for inserting into additional stitches. So like I say, this is the easiest way to insert a lifeline because you don't have to worry about which leg of your stitch you're picking up. Now when I say leg, let's talk about legs real quick for a second. So in knitting, your stitches all lay one way or the other on your knitting needle, and they have two legs. So pretend my fingers are the loop of a stitch, and so there's a front leg and a back leg depending on how you're looking at your work. So when you insert a lifeline when it's on your needle, you can presume that your stitches are already the legs are already aligned correctly, so you don't have to worry about which leg you're picking up in your stitch. But if you insert a lifeline this other way that I'm about to show you, you do need to worry about your legs. So I'm going to pull this lifeline through and show you how to insert a lifeline another way. So another way to insert a lifeline is by picking up the appropriate leg of your stitches in a row that's been done for a while. So not by going parallel to your knitting needle with your tapestry needle, but by sewing straight into the body of your work. So let's go a couple rows down from this red lifeline and insert this yellow one. So I'm going to start right here. I'm just going to skip the border so it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. So I'm working 2 rows below this lifeline here. So I'm skipping this set of stitches and doing this one 2 rows below. And you'll notice this red lifeline, which was inserted using the method I just demonstrated by just sewing parallel to your knitting needle. So you can see that the lifeline is underneath the right side of every stitch. So when I say right side, that would be this side. This here is a stitch, it would be this right side that I'm about to pick up. It's important to always pick up the same side of your stitches so that the legs that I was talking about a moment ago are resting at the same angle. So when you tear back to a given lifeline, if that's what you're going to use it for, your stitches are angled correctly so you don't have to sit there untwisting stitches as you work. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to pull, give myself a little slack here, and I'm going to pick up these last 2 stockinette stitches. There you go. and you can insert a lifeline this way. Some people prefer inserting lifelines the second way I demonstrated because it doesn't affect the tension at all of your work. If you're working on something where you want the tension to be very perfect, you might want to go back and insert lifelines this way rather than by going parallel to your knitting needle. Because if you're inserting a lifeline with yarn that might be a little bit thicker, this yellow yarn's pretty fine, but this red yarn, it did make the yarn required for every loop slightly bigger. So if you are really, really particular about your tension, that's something to keep in mind when inserting lifelines. So the last lesson I want to show you about lifelines today is this. I just want to show you a visual representation of what it looks like to tear back to a lifeline. So let's pretend like, oh shoot, I twisted a stitch 2 rows back. I'm just going to tear back to my lifeline. So to do that, all you've got to do is pull out your knitting needle and get ready. You just pull out all your stitches, and you don't even have to go very slow, because if your lifeline is done correctly, which this one is, you can keep pulling out, and then when you get to the beginning of your lifeline, you can't pull out anymore because the lifeline is stopping you from pulling too many stitches back. And that lifeline there has now set you up, so all you have to do to get your stitches back on your needle is simply insert the needle right through all of them. And you can see here they're all angled the same way. They're all angled this way. And you just slip those right back on your needle. And it's so much easier than having to very carefully and slowly tear back your work. That just ends up wasting so much time that you could be spending straight up knitting. And if you have any tips, tricks, or questions, don't forget to reach out in the comments with those, and tune in again soon for even more video tutorials.